All right, everybody. So thank you for being here. It's funny, the topic, I don't know who comes up with the titles for the chapters in the textbooks, but the title for this chapter is called The Political System Under Strain. And wouldn't that be a perfect title to describe the period we're living through now? Are we living through a political system under strain, you think? So one of the things you learn, and one of the things that I like about history, is that when you study it, at least for me, I think it helps to give you a perspective and to put things into a proper context. And one of the things that I've been saying a lot more lately to all my classes is that the concept of things being better back in the day, the good old days, things being better in the past, is largely nonsense in many ways. When you romanticize the past, it requires you to simply leave out any information that would interfere with that image. The reality is that when you take a closer look, the late 19th century is a very difficult time. And life for ordinary people is hard. This is a world, this is a world that does not have antibiotics. This is a world where racial segregation is still standard procedure in the South. This is a world where women do not have the right to vote. This is a world where government does not get involved to provide a social safety net of any kind. So the good old days often are not as good as people think. And I doubt very much that if any of you had to live back in the 1880s or 1890s, I think that the reality of it would cause you not to be all that thrilled if you did it. Every period in history, every generation has their issues. We have ours, they had theirs. Some of the issues are similar, and some of them are different and unique to our period. For example, do we debate and argue about immigration policy in this country now? Absolutely. The issue of immigration is a very intense political and social issue. And there is a big debate about immigration and, illegal immigration and people who come here who are undocumented, and, what is considered acceptable and what is considered not acceptable. Look, people were having these conversations in the 1880s and 1890s. So there is a similarity there. But there are issues that we debate in this country today that would be alien to people in the 1880s and 1890s. I mean, the topic, for example, of gender identity and gay marriage, if you were to bring that up in the 1880s or 1890s and say, I think that gay couples should be allowed to marry and have the same rights as heterosexual couples, at the end of the 19th century, people would have looked at you as if you were, out of your mind. They would have been unable to even comprehend what you were saying. On the other hand, if you were to say to people in the 1880s, I think the time has come where women should have the right to vote and that women should have the same rights and opportunities as men, a lot of people would have disagreed with you. There is a debate in this country today about marijuana. Should it be legal or should it not be legal? Should it be legal only for medicinal use or should it be legal for recreational use? Well, back then they were arguing about alcohol consumption. And there was a very strong movement to restrict and eventually attempt to ban alcohol. Now, if someone today were to run for political office on a platform of banning alcohol, I don't think they would get very far. So that wouldn't work today. But back then, there is a growing movement called the temperance movement. There was a growing movement called the women's suffrage movement, where women were fighting for the right to vote. There are issues that are unique to our time and issues that are unique to their time. We still debate today the role of big business in our economy and in political life. People were concerned then about the growing influence of big corporations. I'll talk more about that in my next lecture. But today, I mean, we debate the big tech companies, Facebook, Google, Apple, Twitter, and what role do they have in our society, and should they be regulated more? Should antitrust action be taken maybe to break them up, like Facebook, for example? Well, people weren't talking about Facebook at the end of the 19th century, but they were talking about the Standard Oil Company, and they were talking about Carnegie Steel. So, you know, there are similarities. So we're going to take a closer look. One issue that is very unique to the end of the 19th century is the debate over America's money supply, and more specifically, what was known as the gold standard. At that time, paper money in circulation was backed by gold. And basically, the value of the dollar and the amount of paper money in circulation was tied to the amount of gold held in the United States Treasury and the value of that gold. So the ability to make adjustments to the money supply was limited. There were things that simply could not be done if you didn't have the gold reserves to make it possible. So it created restrictions. The flip side to that is that for a lot of people, knowing that your paper was actually backed by gold gave people greater confidence in the value of paper money. This was a big deal back then. I mean, people got in very serious arguments about it. Why was it such a big deal? It's a big deal because the economy is industrializing and the economy is growing. And as the economy grows, if the money supply cannot be adjusted accordingly, it can lead to problems. It can lead to inflation, where prices rise. That is certainly a topic in the news in our time. I'm older than most of my students. I remember when I was a child, the awful situation with inflation in this country in the 1970s. And now, for a variety of reasons, inflation is at its highest rate in 40 years. What does that mean? It means that if your salary hasn't gone up and you go to the grocery store to buy things or you go to pay your bills, what you get for your money is less because the prices have gone up. This was a problem that people experienced, and you can experience this in any industrialized economy. The economy is growing, but the money supply is limited in its ability to make adjustments. The availability and access to credit. Businesses, in order to function, need to be able to borrow money. And for small businesses in particular, this can be critical. But in a money supply that is bound by the limitations of the gold standard, perhaps the availability of credit is limited. So people got into serious arguments about this. There were some people who felt that the dollar should remain exclusively on the gold standard. There were some people who felt that, the heck with it, let's just print as much paper money as the economy requires without being connected to the gold standard. And then there were people who favored what they called bimetallism. Well, we have a lot of silver in this country. Why don't we see if we can inject silver into the economy and see if that helps? I don't know if any of you collect coins, but one of the most beautiful coins, I think, is what's called the Morgan silver dollar, which came out in 1878. And there was an attempt to try and put silver into the economy and see if that would help with problems related to the money supply. This is not, when we argue about economic policy, this is not something that people argue about today. You can argue about taxes, and you can argue about deficit spending, and we can argue about a variety of things. But when's the last time somebody got into a heated argument over the issue?
Okay, so
Sorry.
let's do an updated
the issue of the gold standard or bimetallism or anything like that. So this was a big issue back then. So let me move a little bit forward here. I'm sure that I am not alone in wishing that in our political system we had an alternative to the two main parties. The two main political parties right now are the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And the reality is, ever since the election of 1860, which saw the election of Abraham Lincoln, ever since then, we have been a nation where the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have dominated political power in this country. There are a lot of people now, today, who are not satisfied with the direction of one or both of these political parties, and people who might like to see the emergence of a third party alternative. Well, there are people who felt the same way back then. There were people who were dissatisfied with a lot of things. Tell me if this sounds familiar. People saying that mainstream politicians do not understand their needs, do not care about their problems, people feeling that they have been ignored, people feeling that the only people who matter are the people who have a lot of money. Guess what? People said that in the 1890s and in the 1880s. There were a lot of people who felt ignored by a political system that wasn't working for them. And it did lead to new political movements and new political parties. For example, many of you may not know at one point that there was a political party called the Greenback Party. Well, what is that all about? The greenback is a nickname for the American dollar, for paper money. And there were people who felt very strongly that we needed to be able to print more paper money and put that into the economy. And there was a political movement to that effect. Many of you may not know that there was a political party in this country that became very popular, particularly in the Midwest, called the Populist Party. Well, who is joining the Populist Party? A lot of farmers, a lot of people who are in debt or who are unhappy with monetary policy, small business owners who feel that they are being bullied and dominated by big corporations. And so there is a movement of people who are angry, who feel ignored and who want their voice listened to. So they create this political movement known as the Populist Party. So the question then is, well, why didn't they stick around? Here's what happens. And I think the same thing is true today. When a new political movement begins to grow, if it shows signs of success, in other words, if people reach a point where you can win elections, generally what happens is the issues that support that movement simply become absorbed by one of the mainstream parties. For example, when Barack Obama was elected, there was the growth of what was known as the Tea Party movement, a political movement that favored economic conservatism and that opposed excessive government spending and intervention. And at the time, there were people who questioned the idea of government healthcare. So we have the growth of this Tea Party movement. Well, what happens? As that idea begins to gain in popularity, that agenda simply becomes absorbed by the Republican Party. The same thing happens on the Democratic side. So what you have today is a Republican Party that has moved further to the right and a Democratic Party that has moved further to the left. Well, back then, as the Populist Party grows, by the time we get to the end of the 1890s, going into the early 20th century, a lot of their agenda is going to be absorbed by the Democratic Party. So that when you have a candidate running for president as a Democrat named William Jennings Bryan, a lot of what he is going to say will incorporate ideas from the Populist Party. So that's one of the reasons why you haven't really seen a third party show major success on a national level. Alternative political parties tend to be made up of people who are very energized over one or two or three key issues. But that doesn't mean that it's going to appeal to a broad electorate. For example, when you go to vote, what issue matters the most to you? For some people, it might be abortion. For other people, it might be gun control. For other people, it might be immigration or taxes or environmental policy. It depends. For some people, who they vote for will depend on where they stand on abortion. Or for other people, their main issue might be immigration or gun control. So you have a lot of people checking boxes for different political parties, Republican or Democrat, but based on where they stand on the issue important to them. So that's one of the reasons why you haven't really seen a third party that has been able to rival the Republicans and the Democrats. And there have been moments where it looked like it could be possible. In 1912, Theodore Roosevelt wanted to make a political comeback. And since the incumbent president was a Republican, Theodore Roosevelt ran as a member of the newly formed Progressive Party. And in the end, he didn't win. He got a lot of votes, but he didn't win. And once his political career ended, the Progressive Party that he helped to establish just sort of faded away. I remember when George H.W. Bush ran for re-election against Bill Clinton, and there was the creation of the Reform Party, and it just fizzled out. So that's why, in my opinion, my analysis, you haven't seen more success with alternative political parties. But I want you to be aware of what the big issues were. People argued about politics back then, just like people argue about politics today. I mean, have any of you ever gotten into a really intense argument with someone, a friend or a relative, over a political issue? Well, people did back then, very much so. So it isn't like arguing about political issues is new. And as I said, some of the issues are similar. People argued intensely about immigration policy at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century, just like people argue about immigration policy today. But today we don't have a lot of people arguing about, bimetallism versus the gold standard. But back then, that was a big deal. We have had 4 American presidents who have been assassinated. Abraham Lincoln, and then we had President Garfield and President McKinley, and then later, President Kennedy. Just imagine, do you realize that there were people who would have seen 3 American presidents assassinated within their lifetime, which is pretty crazy. Let me give you a date for the Garfield assassination. President Garfield was shot in 1881. And let's see, McKinley was, hold on a moment. He was assassinated in 1901. So Abraham Lincoln was killed in 1865. So, I mean, there would have been people, imagine being alive to see 3 presidents assassinated. One of the things that comes out of the assassination of Garfield is passage of what is called the Pendleton Act, which one of the big issues of the 1880s is what they called civil service reform. I'll be honest with you. The way it worked in politics for a long time is if you got elected, you gave government jobs to your friends who helped you out. And it didn't necessarily matter if they were qualified for the job, but people who helped you out or contributed to your campaign, you rewarded your political friends with government jobs. Now there is a movement to try and make sure that people are qualified for those jobs. And incidentally, when you see the formation of what's called the Secret Service is responsible for security for the president. But the Secret Service is actually a part of the Treasury Department. And what you may not know is that the Secret Service is also involved in trying to track down people who create counterfeit currency. I said a minute ago that the topic of the gold standard was a very controversial issue in its day. Another big issue in its day was the issue of tariffs. What is a tariff? A tariff is a tax on imported goods. And in 1890, Congress passes what is known as the McKinley Tariff, named after William McKinley, who would eventually become president. Why are tariffs controversial? Well, if you own businesses here in the United States and you want Americans to buy American-made products, by increasing the price of imports, you make domestic products more desirable in terms of cost. The problem is, once you put tariffs on imports, other countries can do the same to you. So let's say you're a business that you want Americans to buy your product, but you also sell to other parts of the world. Well, guess what? Now, all of a sudden, you may have a harder time selling your product around the world if other countries are going to put tariffs on American products in retaliation. Tariffs are in the news now. When Trump was in office, he came down pretty hard on China because labor costs in China are certainly less than here in the United States. And there was a feeling among people of different political backgrounds, really, not just Republicans, but Democrats too, that, you know, China has not been playing fair in terms of their economic policy. And so, you know, tariffs went into effect, let's say, on Chinese steel. But then guess what? They turn around and put a tariff on American agricultural products. So, you know, if you're an American steel company, it might be to your advantage if there are tariffs on Chinese steel. But if you're an American farmer growing soybeans and all of a sudden now, you know, you're having difficulty selling your soybeans abroad, you know, it's almost like playing a game of chicken or mercy. You know, who can take the pain before they give in? And in the end, tariffs can be difficult and lead to the worst situation, which is what you would call a trade war, where you simply make it so difficult for other countries to sell their product in your country that they turn around and do the same thing to you. And in the end, everybody loses. So the McKinley tariff was designed to protect American businesses, which were growing very rapidly and becoming very dominant in the economy. As I said, there was a huge debate in this country over monetary policy. In 1878, they tried to legalize the coinage of silver and see if putting silver coins into the economy would help. In the end, it really didn't. Silver's great, but the value of silver pales in comparison to the value of gold. And the reality is that putting more silver into the economy, into the money supply, didn't fix the problems. Farmers and small business owners were really up against the wall, especially when farmers saw declining prices for their product and difficulty obtaining credit. I mean, if you're a farmer and prices bottom out for your crop and you need to borrow money so you can plant for the next year hoping to do better, but you know the bank isn't going to let you borrow the money, you're in real trouble. And small business owners were up against it too. And many of them felt, and rightly so in my opinion, that you know, the big companies and the big corporations, they're pretty much, you know, getting whatever they want. And the small family farmers and independent business owners are the ones who are really struggling. And this is the beginning of something that is going to build and build. And by the time we get to the 1890s, there is going to be a real backlash to the domination of these big corporations. And by the way, they paid no income tax in those days. There was no income tax. Just bear that in mind. Life was difficult for struggling farmers. And frankly speaking, if you were someone trying to make a living and you were a person of color, there were additional obstacles that you faced because of discrimination, particularly in the South. In those days, how do you do social networking at the end of the 19th century in a world with no computers, no electricity? Really, is just starting. In a world that doesn't have the tools that we have, if you want to get together with other people in the same profession or business, how do you do it? They did it the old-fashioned way. They created organizations, they had mailing lists, they had newsletters, and they had magazines, and they had gatherings and meetings and things of that nature. So the way you did social networking in a world long before Facebook or online ever existed, you might start an organization of farmers, and you might try to get as many people interested on your mailing list. And you may have, a yearly or maybe twice a year, a gathering where a convention where you meet, in a city and stay in a hotel and get together and talk about, well, what can we do to help each other? What can we do to try and pressure our elected officials to change their policy in a way that works better for us? And that's the way it was done back then. Keeping together, getting together with like-minded people and communicating is much easier now with the technology we have. But in the old days, people just did it face to face. And as I said, you might join an organization and they may send out a monthly newsletter or a magazine, and they may have a yearly convention. And that's the way that it was done, that people tried to support each other. One of the things that farmers wanted, because they felt they were really being, bullied by the big corporations, they wanted to see the creation of a federal income tax. And they certainly wanted to see railroads regulated. One of the big problems at that time is railroads are growing rapidly. And if a railroad company wants to build a new railroad line through your property, the government has the right. They called them Granger cases, and the government has the right to basically seize your land under the principle of eminent domain. So let's say, for example, Alexandra, that you and your family have been farming the same piece of land for a century, and all of a sudden some railroad company wants to build a new railroad line through your property and you don't want to sell. Well, you have no choice, because the railroad company is bigger than you and they have more money than you and they have more friends in government than you. And the government is going to back them up, and you're going to be forced to sell your land at whatever the market value is that they determine, whether you like it or not, so that the railroad companies can grow. And a lot of the people who own the farms resented this bitterly. They felt that these railroad companies were basically getting away with whatever they wanted to. And so resentment is building. Working class people and poor people are getting angrier. They are protesting and they're angry over, really poor working conditions, low wages. Small farms and small business owners are getting angrier because they feel they're being bullied and they feel that they're being ignored. So there's a lot going on here politically, and monetary policy is a big part of it. And then, to make matters worse, in 1893, the economy went into an economic depression. What caused it? I mean, there have been different economic depressions and economic problems in history. In 1929, the stock market crashed and it threw the country into the worst depression in its history. In 2008, the real estate market crashed and led to a major economic crisis. In 1893, there were a lot of railroad companies that were expanding, and they were expanding too big, too fast, and borrowing money to do it. And when their revenues didn't turn out the way they expected, they began, in some cases, to default on their loans to the banks. Then some of the banks are in trouble. The one thing you need to understand about a modern economy, that, to be honest with you, it's a little scary. The different sections of the economy are so connected to each other, like a spider's web. If one piece of it fails, the whole thing comes down. And so that's one of the things that makes a modern industrial economy so vulnerable. That if one part of the economy is in trouble, it can take down everything. Excuse me. That's certainly what happened in the Great Depression of the 1930s, which is something that we'll talk about at another time. But the economy goes into a depression in 1893. And what you need to understand is back then, the government is not going to help you. If you are living in America in the 1890s and you lose your job, or you can't afford to pay your rent, or you don't have money to feed your family, the government is not going to do a thing about it. It wasn't the way they thought back then. The concept that the government needs to step in and provide a social safety net is a very modern concept. It simply does not exist in the 19th century mind politically. That is simply a role that is not expected of government. And so, I mean, for example, Grover Cleveland, who was in office, I mean, he felt bad for people, and but he just didn't think that it was the responsibility of the federal government to get personally involved in this. Totally different attitude. I mean, when coronavirus hit, there's going to be, coronavirus relief and government loans and grants to businesses and, stimulus and all the rest of it. The government, in those days, if the economy went south and things were bad, you had to ride it out. The idea of the government, coming to the rescue wasn't going to happen. The problem is that it also led to social unrest because, economic chaos leads to social unrest, and that leads to political instability. All these things are connected to each other. Grover Cleveland is an interesting character. So far, at least, he is the only president in American history to be elected to 2 terms non-consecutively. In other words, he was elected and he served as president from 1885 to 1889. He ran for re-election and lost to Benjamin Harrison. And then he runs again in 1893. He is inaugurated again. So he is president, and then he loses, and then he wins, and then he's president again. And in those days, there were no term limits. Unfortunately for Grover Cleveland, he wins the presidency, and just as he's coming into office, this economic crash, this depression of 1893 hits. And he just doesn't really know what to do about it. I mean, as I said a minute ago, the idea that the government's going to get involved and try to ease the suffering of people because of a bad economy, it just wasn't going to happen. And it didn't happen. So the 1890s are not a happy time. There are labor disputes. There are some ugly strikes. I'll talk more about them later. There's the Homestead strike and there's the Pullman strike. You've got these awful strikes. The Homestead strike is at one of Andrew Carnegie's steel mills, and people get killed. The Pullman strike shuts down the railroads in the whole country practically. I mean, this is bad news. And anyone who talks about, oh, things were so much better, what a wonderful time. No way. I wouldn't want to live in the 1890s. Not a chance. So things are tough. Just to show you what a different time it is, there is no mass media like what we have today. Back then, all you have newspapers and you have print magazines. We're not at a point yet where we have, radio isn't around yet. Movies are not around yet. Grover Cleveland at one point actually developed a cancerous tumor and had surgery. It was an oral tumor, and he was operated on. And believe it or not, they successfully removed it. The American public didn't know a thing about it. It was completely done in secret. Nobody knew. And number one, the surgery was done in secret. And number two, even when it was over, people didn't know about it. Nobody really knew what the president's voice sounded like, unless you were one of those few people around to hear an in-person speech, because, you didn't have, radio and movies and all the rest of it. So the fact that the president wasn't able to speak or be heard for a long time, ordinary people didn't notice. If you wanted to know what the president said in a speech, you read it in the newspaper. So what a different time. Grover Cleveland was involved in a sex scandal. He was a bachelor, unmarried, during his first term, and he had an affair with this younger woman who became pregnant. And it wasn't clear that he was the father of the baby, but he actually handled it very intelligently. Normally, a sex scandal, even today, a sex scandal can end a political career. Just ask, Andrew Cuomo, the former governor of New York. So this is, politically, this is dynamite. Grover Cleveland handled it very intelligently. He said, look, maybe I am the father of this baby. I don't know. So let's say that I am, then I'll pay child support and I'll support the child. And he did. And the scandal went away. When Grover Cleveland was running to be reelected, his opponents ran the political advertising in those days is so silly. His opponents ran an attack ad, a print ad. Again, their newspapers is pretty much all you have, or flyers. They would print flyers, and there was a flyer that showed a crying baby, and the caption underneath was "Ma, Ma, where's my pa?" referring to Grover Cleveland possibly being the father of this child. And the Grover Cleveland people responded with an ad that said, "Gone to the White House, ha, ha, ha." It's silly, but that's late 19th century politics for you. The issue of civil rights, I just did a lecture in one of my other classes talking about the growth of the civil rights movement in this country in the 1950s going into the 1960s. At the end of the 19th century, African Americans are still struggling. Jim Crow is very much entrenched in the South, but we will see the formation of a national organization that is going to fight for the civil rights of Black people in this country. That organization is known as the NAACP, the NAACP, which was formed in the year 1909. And there are some really dynamic leaders who are really working hard in the cause of civil rights for African Americans. And many students, of course, are familiar with Martin Luther King, but how many students know about a man named Booker T. Washington or W.E.B. Du Bois or Dubois? I'm still never quite sure the proper way to pronounce it. I'll say Du Bois. These are two men who they certainly don't agree on everything. Booker T. Washington is supporting the Black community. He helps found the Tuskegee Institute. He wants there to be sort of a slow, steady, gradual approach toward equality and civil rights. And he wants African Americans to demonstrate that they can be economically self-sufficient, and he wants them to be educated and to show that they can do well on their own economically. W.E.B. Du Bois is much more militant, and he's like, no. We deserve full equality. There should be no conditions. If you believe in the Constitution, we all deserve the same treatment. And they didn't necessarily agree on a timeline or strategy of how this should come about. But these are two brilliant, dynamic leaders who are fighting for civil rights at the end of the 19th century, going into the early 20th century. And Booker T. Washington will end up becoming the first African-American man to actually be invited to dine at the White House as the guest of Theodore Roosevelt. And you will be shocked. I mean, the backlash to that, especially in the Southern newspapers, was unbelievable. And Theodore Roosevelt supported Booker T. Washington, who was his friend, but he never invited him back again. So, I mean, this is, the good old days are not so good when you really sit down and take a close look. At least that's my view. Another thing going on during this time is America is looking to expand its global influence. American businesses, they want new markets. They want access to trade goods and raw materials. And the United States wants to join the European powers and become an imperial power during this period of time. And we are looking to expand our influence beyond our borders. And that is what's going to happen. In 1893, the United States takes control over the Hawaiian Islands. This largely was the work of a man named Sanford Dole. Maybe you've heard of Dole pineapple or Dole banana. He's a businessman, and he realizes that the Hawaiian Islands are perfect for growing, fruits that are not available in the mainland United States. And so, he basically he creates a business to basically take control of the Hawaiian Islands, and the United States annexes Hawaii in 1893. We want to have a footprint in the Pacific. We then end up in a situation with the Spanish-American War. And the United States declares war on Spain, April 21st, 1898. It's done under the pretext of a humanitarian crisis. Yeah, it's true. The Spanish were brutal in their occupation and control of Cuba. But the reality is that American businesses are dying to get into Cuba. American businesses want control or at least access to the economy of Cuba and the sugar cane and the tobacco and all the rest of it. And, certainly the United States didn't like the idea of a European power having control of an island in the Western Hemisphere. There are a lot of reasons why there are Americans who want Spain out of Cuba. American businesses certainly want Spain out of Cuba, and they want American business in. There are politicians and military leaders who do not want to see Spain with a foothold so close to our own border in the Western Hemisphere. So under the pretext of trying to liberate the Cubans from the brutality of the Spanish, we end up going to war against Spain. Just as a curiosity, how many of you, regardless of your political beliefs, don't exactly trust the media to be completely honest or tell the whole story? How many of you are suspicious of what we call the media? Well, guess what? You ought to check out a man named William Randolph Hearst. You want to talk about manipulating the news. William Randolph Hearst had a newspaper empire in this country, and he very much supported the idea of going to war with Spain and used his newspaper empire to print stories to try and influence the American people to go along with it. And he's, this is People criticize what they see on cable news or on the internet. Is it fake news? Is it the whole truth? Is it being shown with a spin? Are some stories, pushed and other stories ignored? It isn't new. It was going on back then. They called it yellow journalism. And William Randolph Hearst is selling newspapers. And he's pushing the country to war. I'll share with you that I don't like William Randolph Hearst, but I'll give him credit for one thing. He probably built the most beautiful house in California. If you ever visit the Central Coast area, you can visit, they call it the Hearst Castle. And he built a private residence, and Hearst was a big collector of antiquities and fine art. And I would argue that, this guy, I'll give him credit. He has built the most beautiful home. And if you get a chance to see it, you should take a look at it. It'd make a nice trip for you. Take a drive up and check out the Hearst Castle. But he is a person using his control of the newspapers to manipulate public opinion. That's all there is to it. The United States sent the battleship down to Cuba as a show of force, just like Biden. We're worried about Russia possibly invading Ukraine, so Biden has ordered American troops to reinforce our NATO allies in Eastern Europe. So McKinley sends the battleship Maine to Havana, and it blows up. And right away, before even trying to figure out what happened, the Hearst newspapers are printing stories that the Spanish did it, and that this was an act of Spanish sabotage. And of course, the whole country goes into a frenzy. And next thing you know, we declare war on Spain. So I'm going to talk more about the Spanish-American War, but I'm going to ask you about American imperialism. What I'd like to do is to conclude my lecture with a short video about the Spanish-American War, and then I will give you credit for being here, and we will call it a day. So let me see if I can do my screen share. Here we go. All right, check this out. It's a very brief video.
Hearst published story after story from Cuba, each more sensational and less tethered to reality than the last. He soon zeroed in on an 18-year-old revolutionary named Evangelina Cisneros, who'd been imprisoned without a trial. The Journal published wildly melodramatic articles about her plight. Then Hearst had one of his reporters smuggle her out of Havana, disguised as a man and smoking a Cuban cigar. Cisneros arrived in New York, a sensation. Hearst paraded her around the city like his own personal war trophy, hosting an elaborate dinner in her honor at Delmonico's, a ball at the Waldorf, and a rally at Madison Square Garden that drew 75,000. His frenzied coverage brought more and more readers to the Journal and branded Spain as enemy number one. Then on February 15th, 1898, off the coast of Havana, a battleship called the USS Maine exploded. 266 American sailors were dead. Hearst was convinced that Spain was to blame and was determined to seize the opportunity. Arouse everybody, Hearst telegrammed his team. Maine is a great thing.
This point is when he began to, for the first time, cross these lines. What he did was so beyond the bounds of acceptable journalism by any standard.
Hearst immediately publishes on his front pages a variety of stories going after the Spanish, all made up.
The battleship Maine was probably an accident. Everything suggests that it was an accident, but at that point, it was impossible to simmer everybody back down. So war seemed inevitable at that point, and Hearst loved it.
Yep, that's what you call real, that's fake news. You know, so the media, I mean, if you think, you know, well, the media, you know, they used to be so much more trustworthy. Well, you know, here's an example where maybe that isn't the case. And I apologize, I didn't turn off my phone ringer. Does anyone have any questions before we call it a day? And I'm glad, I thank you all for being here, by the way. And I apologize again, I have to turn off the ringer on my phone. Anyone have any questions?
No questions.
Well, let me give you your extra credit for being here and let you go, and then we'll do this again tomorrow.